In the next hour, a former Florida tax collector with very close ties to sitting U.S. Congressman Matt Gaetz is expected to plead guilty to sex trafficking and other charges. As a part of this plea agreement, Joel Greenberg has agreed to cooperate in a sex crimes investigation, and that could potentially spell trouble for Congressman Gaetz.
4 months, authorities have been looking into whether the Florida Republican congressman broke himself federal sex trafficking laws, in particular whether he had sex with a minor as well. CNN's Paula Reed, live in Orlando. Paula, so we're going to see Greenberg at this hearing. He's going to have to cop to this, right? He's going to have to say out loud, I did these things. What do we expect to hear from him?
That's exactly right. And this will be the first time that we've seen Greenberg since it was revealed that he is indeed in this formal cooperation agreement with the Justice Department. During this hearing, he's expected to plead guilty to 6 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor. A lot of folks, though, asking, what does all of this mean for Congressman Matt Gaetz, his one-time very close associate? Well, we have to note, Gaetz is not mentioned at all in the plea agreement that was revealed on Friday. He's, of course, not been formally charged. But there is one part of this agreement that is significant. This is what we're going to be watching. Greenberg will admit that not only did he have sex with a minor at least 7 times, he will also tell the court that he introduced that minor to other men who then paid that minor for sex. The question is, who are those men? Now, the congressman has denied any wrongdoing, but over the weekend, he tried out a new, rather unusual defense. Let's take a listen to what he said.
And just imagine the irony here. I am being falsely accused of exchanging money for naughty favors. Yet Congress has reinstituted a process that legalizes the corrupt act of exchanging money for favors through earmarks.
Well, the Justice Department is not in the business of investigating, quote, naughty favors. They investigate crimes. And we know from our sources the congressman is under investigation for allegations of sex trafficking, sex with a minor, prostitution, and possible public corruption. So while comparing sex with an underage girl to earmarks may be something the congressman wants to try out in the court of public opinion, when it comes to swaying the hearts and minds of the prosecutors who are assessing all the evidence that they have collected against him and deciding whether they can charge him, that defense is not going to work.
Yeah, well, what works at a Republican Party event, not the same as what works in a court of law. Paula Reed, thanks so much for covering this. Joining me now is Ellie Honig. He's a former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York and a CNN senior analyst. Ellie, let's break this down. First of all, Gaetz' lawyer saying, hey, Gaetz isn't mentioned at all in this plea agreement, therefore we're free and clear. What's the truth?
Completely insignificant, Jim. That means absolutely nothing. I've written more of these cooperation agreements than I can count. I've done more of the cooperation pleas, which we're about to see in a few hours, than I can count. You never specify the name of somebody you're investigating as a prosecutor. You never specify the name of a target. A lot of good reasons for that. Number one is you don't want to tip the person off. Number two is the person has not been formally charged yet. They have rights until and unless they are charged. So they're trying to make something out of absolutely nothing there. What is significant, as Paula said, is that the documents do several times mention other men, other people who are involved. The big question is, who are those other people?
Ellie, you know how plea agreements like this are made and what kind of cooperation prosecutors demand to make such a plea agreement, which involves typically a reduced sentence. So, knowing that, what kind of cooperation from Greenberg would you expect them to want as regards Matt Gaetz and his involvement?
Yeah, Jim, prosecutors do not hand out cooperation agreements like candy. In fact, prosecutors are very sparing and careful in who they choose to give that opportunity to cooperate and get a much reduced sentence, which if Joel Greenberg cooperates truthfully and successfully, he will be in position to do. If you're going to cooperate someone like Joel Greenberg and his criminal conduct is heinous, you have to think twice, and a third time and a fourth time. You have to be assured of 2 things. One, you better be able to back him up because his record is atrocious. Nobody's going to take Joel Greenberg at his word. You have to have hard proof for everything he says. And 2, you better be darn ready to make other cases off of Joel Greenberg's information. You're giving up too much by giving him a break to not make other cases. So if you're going to cooperate with someone like Joel Greenberg, there are other cases in the work.
So tell us about the timing now. Greenberg's going to be in court today. He's already made his agreement, and he would have had to do what's called a proffer. In other words, he would have had to make clear exactly what he's going to offer to get this in exchange. including possibly what he knows about Gates' involvement. So how quickly do we learn something about whether prosecutors may have the goods on Gates?
My read from looking at the 86-page plea documents, Jim, is that prosecutors are far along in this investigation. You don't sign someone up as a cooperator, first of all, until you've done full debriefings. Those can take days or weeks. But if you look at the cooperation papers, there is all sorts of detail in those papers. Prosecutors talk about texts that they've picked up, financial documents that they've picked up, all sorts of what we call corroboration. So it looks to me like they have this case wrapped up tight as with respect to Joel Greenberg and presumably with respect to others. So we're fairly close to the time when prosecutors are going to have to decide who else are we charging and with what.
Now there's another target, it appears, of prosecutors here for cooperation, and that's actually Gates' ex-girlfriend. How crucial could her testimony or involvement or cooperation be?
Yeah, she could be crucial. Different kind of cooperation, it appears, than Joel Greenberg, because Joel Greenberg's doing the kind where you have to plead to very serious offenses. Yeah. It appears this ex-girlfriend will just be testifying voluntarily, not to criminal conduct, but crucial, Jim, because one of the most important forms of corroboration is what are other witnesses saying, especially other witnesses like this ex-girlfriend who don't have any crimes that they're facing. So if I'm prosecuting this case, I'm looking at everything Joel Greenberg says, I'm matching it up with what the ex-girlfriend says, and I'm asking whether they conflict or whether they're consistent. And given the prosecutors are about to go ahead with this, I think the reasonable assumption is they're consistent.
Yeah. All right. Well, lots to watch here, Ellie Honig. Thanks so much for breaking